Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 5 Minute Library. I'm Piyushi Sharma, and I am here with Vish Dhamija. Vish has been with us previously, and a lot of you already probably know him as the first Indian origin legal fiction slash legal thriller author in the world. And Vish has just come out with his 11th book, Cold Justice. So today we'll be talking to Vish about his process and everything that goes in the making of a book that's from a genre so rare and how it's turned out so far. So hi Vish and welcome back to the 5 Minute Library.
Thank you, Piyushi, for the lovely introduction. Thank you for having me, 5 Minute Library. And we miss you, Ira.
When it comes to this industry, right? Legal thrillers, like you said, it's just something so new. It's something that I hadn't heard of until we read one of your books. So now, since we last spoke, how has the industry progressed and what do you think is the future of this genre when it comes to the Indian demographic?
Okay, the industry has, like all industries after COVID, are struggling. There is no two questions about it. One of the biggest publishers, Westland, I think, which was owned by Amazon, has closed down. So it just tells you the industry is not in the best of shape. Regarding this particular genre, it is new in India by an Indian author. Legal thrillers have always sold in India, from Perry Mason to John Grisham to Scott Turow to Richard North Peterson. It's just that very few, somehow this genre has been dominated by the Americans. To Kill a Mockingbird was the starting of the restarting, because Perry Mason came way early. If you look at the legal scenario, and this is what I tell everyone, and that should explain why people are interested in legal thrillers, that when you go to a doctor's surgery, you go into his or her room, or the inspection table, and the matter is between you and the doctor. When it comes to court proceedings, there is place for an audience. The very fact that audience like to come and visit court proceedings explains that there is interest in court cases. Now, if you expand it further or out, if you fictionalize it, then you have a lot of canvas to play around with. You can bring in more characters, you can bring in bigger twists, which might or might not happen in real cases. And therefore, it appeals to a lot of people because it automatically, a court case, if you're writing, fictionalizing it, would have a twist or two, would have a mystery or two. And that combined gives it that aura of, being wanting to be read. I think that is the core of legal thriller genre.
Yes, I see how it's always been dominated by the American authors, which is it's true for a lot of our media, whether it's books, whether it's news, whether it's any form of digital content. So I think it's great that now there's a lot more countries coming forward with diversity in literature, and it's being acknowledged at a global scale. For example, with you staying in London, but still having your books being circulated so much in India. I think that's pretty great because that's so much diversity here that we're seeing, and finally getting to see a lot of Indian authors have a global platform. So when it comes to the legal thriller genre, right, such a unique genre. So what are the unique challenges that come up with editing, publishing, or marketing a legal thriller? Because there's so many little nuances that you have to take care of. Whereas, the court proceedings that you've written about, those little things here and there, some of the legal words that, civilians would not really know about. So what are the unique challenges that come up?
So one is you need to have some basic understanding of the law. I was always interested in law. I did 1 year of law, and then I kind of jumped ship and did an MBA. But I wanted to be a lawyer. Now, these are past regrets that very few people get to revisit and, do something about it. As a result, I've always kept abreast of, I as a passion, I go to indianqanoon.com and look at case proceedings. So all cases, after they have been judged by, and they get into public domain. They're no longer private. Any court case that has been judged already and finished is in public domain. I read a lot of legal fiction. I see a lot of legal shows. So Suits, who are we had the Good Wife, uh, hazar things to watch. Then I have a lot of friends who started doing law with me, and although I dropped out, they continued and became lawyers. And that is a good collection of people I can always call back to check a fact. So if I'm using a section 520, I'm just making it up. So everyone knows section 420 is 420 is basically cheating, but there are various sections, and you need to just be careful that the section, you don't even have to mention the section, but if you're using a little legal loophole, you need to understand it and see if your twist or whatever the story is fits into it. One of the challenges is that obviously when it comes to the final editor, they have their own perception of what can and what cannot happen. I don't know if you've read the book called Mughal. So in Mughal, the editor finally came back to me, said, and this is towards the finishing of the book, saying this cannot happen. So it was you must read the book. I wouldn't give it away. It was a case of whether your teardrop carries your DNA or not. So she was of the opinion that tears do not have DNA. Now, she must have spoken to some experts, I'm fair. So I knew somebody in Haryana police. I called them up. They put me on to Haryana forensics. And we had this discussion, three-way discussion. And the gentleman in the forensics was very helpful. And he explained that if the tear falls directly, there is about a 5% chance that it might carry a DNA, which he said for fiction is enough because you're just showing it happen. But if the tear drops through the cheek, it has already carried the DNA. There is no question about it. The moment it has touched your skin. So these kind of things do, because, depending on the expert you are talking to, all the theory you have read, broadly speaking, if you ask someone, do tears have DNA? They will say no. But there is a 5% chance that it has plucked your eyelash or something. And if it comes through the cheek, it is. So Mughal was based on a legal loophole that was actually discovered in this world in 2003 or 4. They were doing a case, and I'll just give you a brief synopsis of, they found a rape victim, and the specimen collected from the rape victim carried the DNA who was in jail. So he couldn't have been there. So how did the DNA of a person in jail travel to the woman who was raped somewhere? And this was discovered by a scientist in Canada. He was Indian origin. I wouldn't give you anything away, but read it and you'll realize how I made the whole story around it. So it's based on that little fact, but the story is completely fictional. So, and that was because the way they were collecting the DNAs throughout the world. And that is when the authorities realized that they have been making the mistake, not someone else, not the person who's doing the detective work after that. If the DNA is wrong, then the entire, what is it called? Garbage in, garbage out. If the data that comes in is wrong, the end result will obviously be wrong. So that is how I played. So I think, and as you write legal thrillers, now that people know me a little bit, it is very easy to call someone and ask for details, and they know that you're asking for fiction and you're not going to break the law or that way. That.
On that note, that also, I'm sure it makes it so much more harder to form all these plot twists to keep the reader hooked. And the plot twist that you had in this book towards the end and also somewhere in the middle, it was something that I absolutely did not see coming, especially towards the end. Did not see it. There was nothing that could have led to it. And even with foreshadowing, it wasn't something that you could have obviously read, where, you see a movie and you're like, how much pata hai, this will happen next, they will say this next. Not like that at all. It was very, very much of a surprise. So my question is, when you have so many different factors weighing in, where you have to write a plot twist, you have to foreshadow it, you have to make sure that the legalities are right, and the book is building up well to that plot twist, so it doesn't look like, it's not fully connected. It's still believable. How do you go about deciding this? How do you go about writing that plot twist? What's your process for that?
So normally when I start writing a story, I have the beginning, which is because I have up to date only written crime fiction. So I obviously have what crime will occur, whether it is murder or burglary or whatever, or whatever, and how will it get solved. So when you come to how will it get solved, you need to, as an author or as a writer, you need to identify two things. One, how will it get solved for the protagonist, and how will it get solved for the reader? Because they're two separate things which should not be confused. Because the protagonist has to go and find the clue. Even if the reader knows the ending, how do you get, so it's like a puzzle. You have the picture on the box and you have the pieces. So a reader, even if you know that this is what it looks like, how do you go about building those pieces to come to that picture? So protagonist's job is to find those clues to come to that conclusion. So in some thrillers, and thrillers do not necessarily carry a mystery. Sometimes it is very obvious to the reader of who's done it, but how and why are things that you have to build towards, which the protagonist doesn't. So there are two parts to it. One is how will, even if I know, how will the protagonist find out? So sometimes when you go to films, you see the villain standing behind the door with a knife and the protagonist is entering, and you are scared the hero shouldn't get knifed or the heroine shouldn't get knifed. And that is the thrill that it brings. So that is one part from your perspective as a reader or a viewer. From a protagonist, he has to solve the mystery by little pieces. So in this case, I can't give it away otherwise. You know how Pentium has kind of worked it out and given it, and because he's a hardcore loyalist, he's just withdraws and goes. I can't give more of the book away, but that is how. So you need to have the beginning and the end, and in the end you need to have two things: one for the protagonist, one for the reader. As long as you separate them, sometimes it can be one, but if you separate them, it's a bigger shock always.
Absolutely. That explains a lot of how the plot twist came to be. And speaking of how you write a book, there's also a couple of underlying themes that I sort of picked up on while reading the book. And I think that's very subjective. It depends on every reader whether they pick it up and how they view it. And in my case, what I could view was one theme was the fact that there was a lot of representation for women in the legal industry, because there's a lot of strong characters that, in line with the main characters of the book, that show successful women in this industry that's primarily male dominated in India, which was one theme that I picked up on that I truly enjoyed. And another theme that I picked up on was that you mentioned a lot of this elitism that occurs in India, from things like if you travel in economy, and you ask for a drink, they give you one glass. But if you travel in business, they give you two. So if you're rich, does that mean you can't get drunk and misbehave? So there's a lot of different mentions, that you put in the book. And that was something that felt a lot more relatable to real life, which made the book a lot more believable. And what I wanted to ask you was that, while there's these themes as well, there's also a lot of character flaws that you've integrated into these themes. So how is it that you process these flaws of characters into the writing? And how do you decide that these are the themes that you want to touch upon?
So some of it is personal experience. So I've traveled in both classes depending on at times. And you see that when you are in an economy, they give you one bottle and then they kind of up, and then you have to ask for another bottle, and then then after the third they might say, oh sir, we've run out of this and run out of that, because I don't know why. But if you're in the business, they bring you two bottles as if, why is your capacity increased only because your wallet is bigger? So these kind of things, our personal experiences that I have experienced would put someone else into it. The personal taste on music obviously reflects. So I listen to a lot of jazz and classic and rock. So it always reflects in some character or the other. Women have always been, I don't know if you've read any of the Rita Ferreira books, which have been picked up by a producer. I think the series should be out next year,
Okay.
Amazon Prime. When I look at a character, for me, the gender comes second. So primarily how I started, and I'm taking you off course here, in Rita Ferreira books, when I wrote the first book in the series called Bhendi Bazaar, there was every bit of chance that the glory would go to the villain or anti-hero. And to reflect that, to kind of counter that, I had to build a character which was strong enough and to stand on his or her own at that point. At the same time, I do not want to create superhumans or superheroes. So, irrespective of how good you are in your profession, as a human being, we all have inherent faults. Now, these could be real irritants for you, but for me, it works. So I always observe people, all writers observe people more, closely than others. And and when you start writing, you pick up things which are subconscious in your mind. So you saw a person, not necessarily that Piyushi looks like this, but if you do this every 5 minutes, maybe that is something I will pick up and put it in a character, which 20% of the world population or Indian population, when they read, they either do this themselves or know someone who do this. And I don't know whether it will come in audio. You've seen a lot of people doing this. Even I'm doing this when I'm sweating. So these are the kind of things that you pick up when you watch people and then you put them in real life, which is not necessarily a character flaw, but it kind of reflects the realism of people. And I've always told everywhere in every interview and every media and every friend that as long as people believe in characters, the story will move forward. So 50 years on, that Gabbar Singh still kind of raat ko neend nahi aati types. You believe that character was horrible, that character was dangerous and threatening. So it's the characters. And once you get the characters on the book or in a story, then the characters kind of tell the story. It's never the narrator. It's always the character moving the story forward. So that is how that's why I spend a lot of time building my characters. So a lot of time goes into what would the person be, whether the person would be female or male. If they're female or male, what would they look like? What would they represent? What would they do? What are their pluses and minuses? So there's a sheet of characterization that I make before I start writing. And even I do it for minor characters as well. Not very minor.
It shows.
I do it for Pentium is also a fully developed character that he's made an appearance in the second book. So he's there in Unlawful Justice. I would strongly recommend, if you like Whole Justice, that read Unlawful Justice. I might have a copy.
Oh, perfect. Done.
This was done by HarperCollins.
I believe this was done by Pan Macmillan India.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much, Vish, for being here. And to everyone who was listening to our episode, make sure that you pick up a copy of Cold Justice. And we would like to request that you pick up copies from independent bookstores so that we don't have to view any more bookstores closing. And if you cannot, then make sure you follow Vish to know all the other platforms his books are on. Thank you, Vish, for being here. Thank you for being on our show and explaining to our readers all these different new things that have been coming up, whether it's books, these different genres, all these little loopholes in legal thrillers. And I'm truly excited to read what you write next.
Thank you, Piyushi. Thank you, 5 Minute Library. And again, we miss you, Ida. People just read. Reading is a very good habit, irrespective of what genre, irrespective of whether you read me or someone else. Read, give Indian authors a chance, and give the local bookstores a chance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.